Over the years there have been many beat-em-up games in arcades, some 2D, some 3D, some side-scrolling, some based on TV series or films. Here we take a look back at some of those games. A side-scrolling beat-em-up released by Irem in 1984. It was known in Japan as Spartan X and was a tie-in game based on the Jackie Chan film Wheels on Meals, although it was originally going to be based on the Bruce Lee film Game of Death that came out in 1972. In the game, you control Thomas, the Kung Fu master, who must fight his way through 5 levels of the Devil's Temple in order to rescue his girlfriend, Sylvia, from the mysterious crime boss known simply as Mr. X. Released in 1986 by Orma and known in Japan as Uga no Shiru, you control a gladiator named Great Granolus as he makes his way through a castle with his sword and shield. Gameplay is split between 2 modes, Obstacle Mode and Fight Mode. The game consists of 4 levels, with the player being rewarded with a 5th level, known as Treasure Place, if they complete the game. The game also features a multiplayer mode. Developed by Technos Japan and released in 1986, this game is a conversion of the Japanese arcade game Nikutsu Kuru Kinu Kan. The player controls a vigilante who must fight various street gangs on his way to save his girlfriend. There are 4 stages in the game, and the game features both a single and a multiplayer mode. The game introduced several trademarks in beat-em-ups, including 4-directional control and enemies which can sustain multiple hits. It is considered a highly influential video game. Developed by Sculptured Software and released in 1987, you control a ninja who must penetrate a Japanese fortress by fighting enemy ninjas using karate moves and throwing daggers. The player must also collect all of the idols whilst traversing the fortress. Unlike some games, the player is not forced along a set route, allowing you to explore and backtrack to earlier screens. The game is single player. Street Fighter is a well-loved beat-em-up released by Capcom in 1987. The player takes control of Ryu, who competes in an international martial arts tournament to prove his strength. The player competes in a series of one-on-one matches against a CPU opponent or in a single match against another player. There are 3 rounds in each match, and the player must knock out their opponent in less than 30 seconds. The game was a commercial success in arcades and introduced some of the conventions made standard in later games, such as the 6-button control and use of command-based speed techniques. Released by Technos Japan in 1987, it is a spiritual successor to Technos' earlier beat-em-up, Renegade. The player takes control of martial artist Billy Lee or his twin brother Jimmy, as they fight their way into the lair of the Black Warriors gang in order to rescue Billy's love interest, Marion. Some of the enemies carried melee weapons which could be knocked out of their hands and then used against them. The game features up to 2 players simultaneously. A side-scrolling beat-em-up developed by Taito and released in 1987. Players take control of Kanuchi or Ninja and must fight wave after wave of Bangalore forces set across 5 levels. The game is set in the near future where Bangalore is the President of the United States and issues martial law, with the military having taken total control over the law. The game was received with overall positive praise. The game was developed by Irem and released in 1988. It is considered to be a spiritual sequel to their earlier game Kung Fu Master. The game takes place in New York City and involves a professional martial artist who becomes a vigilante to fight an evil gang known as the Skinheads and save a female hostage named Madonna, who the gang kidnaps. The player controls the martial artist using punches and kicks to defeat the gang. There are 5 stages in the game. A side-scrolling beat-em-up from Sega released in 1988. The player controls one of 2 cartoon ducks named Bin and Pin, who are pets of a girl named Lucy, who has been kidnapped by an evil sorcerer. The player's mission is to rescue her. The game features 6 stages and can be played in either single or 2-player mode. This side-scrolling beat-em-up was developed by SNK and released in 1988. The objective of the game is to escape from the enemy's base by fighting through 4 stages filled with soldiers trying to stop your escape. You control a prisoner while a second player can also join in. This side-scrolling beat-em-up was released by Tecmo in 1988. In Europe it was known as Shadow Warriors. The player controls a ninja who has been hired to defeat an evil cult, progressing through stages and defeating enemies along the way. The game features a 2-player and a co-op mode, and the game was well received. The side-scrolling beat-em-up developed by Technos Japan and released in 1988, and is a sequel to Double Dragon. The sequel involves Billy and Jimmy from the first game, and sees them on a mission to avenge the death of Billy's girlfriend, after she is shot by the Black Warriors leader. Like the first game, there are 4 stages, and the game can be played in single or multiplayer modes. Released in 1988 by Namco, this is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with a horror theme that sees the player control Rick, a student who is trapped in a mansion and must fight off hordes of creatures in an attempt to rescue his girlfriend Jennifer. The game was influenced by films such as Friday the 13th and The Evil Dead 2. Released by Data East in 1988 and known as Dragon Ninja in Japan, this game is similar in gameplay to other arcade games such as Rush and Attack, Kung Fu Master, and Shinobi. In this game, 2 players can play at once, one controls Blade, and the other controls a character called Striker. They must rescue the president who has been abducted by the evil Dragon Ninja. Another well-known classic, this one from Sega, and was released in 1988, a side-scrolling beat-em-up that features some platform elements and sees the player control a centurion who must fight undead creatures and monsters across 5 levels. The player must collect 3 orbs by defeating certain enemies. These 3 orbs, once collected, will turn the centurion into a beast, where you can then fight the end boss. Up to 2 players can play at once, and the game was well received upon release. Released by Konami in 1989, this side-scrolling beat-em-up sees the player take control of an undercover police officer who must rescue a group of kidnapped girls from a crime boss. The game had single and multiplayer modes for up to 4 players. This 2D beat-em-up was developed by Sunsoft and Sega and released in 1989. Up to 2 players control office workers who must progress through warehouses and urban areas beating up gang members. The player has a variety of attacks by using a combination of 3 buttons or using them individually. The game was released by Tecmo in 1989 and was known as Wildfang in Japan. The player controls Tecmo Knight, who has the assistance of Smokeman and Tiger. Pressing the change button allows him to switch between the 2. The game had single player and multiplayer options. Another classic beat-em-up from Sega, released in 1989. In this game, an evil entity known as Death Adder has captured the king and his daughter, and it's up to 3 warriors to rescue them. You progress through the game by fighting Death Adder's henchmen, including skeleton warriors and knights. The game featured single player and multiplayer modes. Developed by Alpha Denshi and released in 1989, this beat-em-up takes place in New York City and sees martial artists Mike and Jackie fighting their way through parts of New York City in order to stop a gang who are terrorizing the city and kidnapped a young woman named Cynthia. The game featured single player and multiplayer modes. Released by Konami in 1989, a popular side-scrolling beat-em-up that lets the player choose from one of the 4 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Shredder kidnaps April O'Neil and Splinter, and it's up to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to save their friends and to defeat Shredder. Each turtle has different attacks and abilities. The game has a single player and a multiplayer mode with up to 4 players on some cabinets that are featured in the arcades. Released by Capcom in 1989, this game began development as a sequel to the original Street Fighter, but was changed following the success of Double Dragon. The game can be played by up to 2 players simultaneously and is set in a fictional town in the United States. The game was well received upon release. A 1989 beat-em-up released by Kaneko. The game is partially based on the hip-hop culture of US cities. What made the game unique was the fact that many characters rode around on roller skates rather than walking or running. The game takes place across various stages, with DJ Boy using hand-to-hand combat moves to defeat opponents, and a boss at the end of each level. He can also pick up prizes along the way, which can be used to purchase power-ups later on in the game. The game featured 2 players simultaneously in cooperative or competitive modes, meaning players could go against each other if they wanted to. The side-scrolling beat-em-up from Alpha Denshi released in 1990. The game follows twin ninja warriors Joe and Hayabusa, who are waging a battle against an evil ninja clan known as Cage Kazuha, and they must fight their way into the enemy's home fortress, the Ninja Tower. The game featured single-player and 2-player co-op modes. Unfortunately, the game was poorly received, most notably for the stiff controls. This game was released by Sega in 1990. The game had a similar art style to Golden Axe, and it sees a special force known as Alien Busters, who must stop an alien race from invading Earth. There are 9 missions to complete, with each mission taking on an objective to be completed. A side-scrolling beat-em-up from Technos Japan released in 1990. The game can be played by up to 2 or 3 players, and sees Billy and Jimmy Lee returning from the previous 2 games, along with a new character named Sonny. In this game, the heroes meet a fortune teller, who tell them that in order to challenge the world's strongest opponents, they must find the 3 Rosetta Stones that are scattered across the world. Some stages in the game allow the players access to an item shop where they can purchase power-ups. Released in 1990 by Sega, this game sees Michael Jackson attacking enemies but with magic powers as opposed to physical contact. The aim of the game is for Jackson to get from the start to the end without losing all his health, whilst rescuing children and defeating enemies. Developed by Taito and released in 1990, the aim of the game consists of players hitting targets and enemies. Each target has a set number of tons of resistance, and once they are depleted, they will be defeated. The game features a pair of gloves and a punch pad that rises when the player has to attack. The game features 5 stages and was single player only. Released in 1990 by Technos Japan, the player takes control of one of 3 strongmen and must progress through 6 stages set in unique locations, taking on enemies and a gang leader. The game features single player and co-op modes.